Yo, what is poppin', my 420 army? Is your boy Liam 420, and we're doing another What If video. This time we're doing an Outlast Steam 1. After two Cars Steam 1s, and figured I could start doing more. Figured I would pump out as many of these as I can think of, and if you have any ideas, leave them in the comments. But basically we have this one, this Outlast Steam 1 is what if Waylon Park was never caught sending the email to Miles Upshur? And this is probably like a whole big one because Waylon getting caught is probably like what results in the games happen. Results in the whole game happen, whole aspect of whistleblower happening, and Waylon actually using his footage to catch it and upload that to the public. So yeah, but basically this is anyways up to like a lot of speculation because we don't really know what exactly happens on moving stuff from Miles and Waylon, which even though if you saw some of my older lore videos I would kind of like make something up just to make it just so that it would fit into the video. Some people would actually like those changes, and some people would be like, no, I don't think that change really works out well because of this. But yeah, since there's probably we'll just get started on this right away. So anyways, the whole sequence where Waylon is actually typing the email, but basically that'd be the same where Waylon gets the laptop and he's in the server room sending it before. Obviously, in our what if scenario, the guard does not call Waylon after he hits send, and then Waylon would still leave the room regardless, carrying the laptop but this time he'd actually take the laptop with him since there's no guard telling him that he's needed at the engine. However, he would still hear the announcement to get the morphogenic engine monitor, so Waylon would quickly return his laptop to wherever he got it from, and then he'd head to the morphogenic engine room, and then that whole sequence with him debugging the engine for Eddie Gluskin would still be the same, and he probably wouldn't be so keen on getting back to his laptop since he already returned it in our what if scenario, but Steve and the other security guards would ask him to leave the engine room, so instead of heading back to the server room, Waylon would probably head to the cafeteria or anywhere else in the lab if he hasn't. And also, if Waylon hasn't packed up all his stuff, he would probably sneak up to the admin block to do that in the room he would be sleeping in every night, since we obviously know the staff were staying at the asylum and had minimal contact with their families, so that they wouldn't risk their illegal experiments getting leaked to the public. But my best bet is that Waylon had already packed his stuff before he did his morning routine, and then heading down to the lab. So he's probably already packed. He just has to wait for a chance to grab his stuff and sneak out of the asylum. And this would probably mean Waylon would still be in the underground lab when Billy Hope takes control of Walrider, and he would actually hear the warnings from the speakers about the lateral incision, the staff holy fuck, it's the Walrider. Waylon would actually be in the lab when all that happens. So then he'd have to begin making his way to the elevator in order to get to the admin block, but he'd also have to keep an eye out for Jeremy Blair too, because, well, actually, or it depends on if Jeremy is still in the lab, or even though I have mentioned in past videos, basically after knocking out Waylon, Jeremy headed up to the admin block briefly, and then once the slaughter started, he ran to the prison block to guard the radio and make sure nobody uses that. But since Waylon doesn't know about the radio in the prison, and since he wasn't taken to the hospital and would have never heard the guards talking about it, he doesn't know the radio exists. Even though Frank Manera, which by the way, despite Waylon not going to the hospital, Frank Manera would still be the same even if he didn't encounter Waylon. He'd just keep eating everybody alive and eating everybody he sees in the hospital like he does in the actual Whistleblower DLC, up until he ends up getting killed by another patient, or basically whatever happens to him after Waylon leaves the hospital, since his further fate is unknown after that. But it is known that the asylum that the incident was 100% fatal, so Frank probably did end up dying, but... And if Waylon doesn't get taken to the hospital, I'm not really sure where he'd get a camera from in order to record everything in the asylum. Like, he would still camp in the admin block until the patients from the underground lab get up there, and he would try to record little bits of them killing the staff, and also grab some of the documents scattered around the admin block, like he did for the underground lab, depending on if Waylon stuck around. He'd still have those files, but then we don't know if he'd probably stick around to see Chris Walker come and see him slaughtering the tactical unit in the library, like he did right before Miles Upshur arrives, and then Waylon would... If Waylon is still in the asylum when Miles Upshur arrives, then Waylon would probably try to meet up with Miles somehow, and then they head into the aftermath of the library attack, and they still record Stephenson on the iron pole, and then the two of them would end up leaving through the broken window Miles entered through, instead of trying to unlock the main doors, which also means that Father Martin would not meet Miles, and Martin would also never burn himself in the chapel, so that whole sequence, and even that whole sequence with Chris Walker throwing Miles out the window, is completely gone. Although, if Waylon left before Miles arrives, then Miles' story would probably be exactly the same as it is. And if Miles and Waylon escape together, then Richard Trager would survive until morning and continue mutilating patients like he was doing up until he captured Miles, and then he'd probably end up getting shot dead by the second tactical unit that arrives, and Chris Walker would continue roaming the asylum, trying to stop the Walrider, depending on where he is in the asylum when the second unit arrives. He'd probably slaughter the second unit as well, like he did the first unit, and by the way, if you're wondering about Eddie Gluskin, he would probably still be the same with everyone in the vocational block before possibly being killed somehow, because I don't think he would get impaled on the iron rod like he did in the official game when he was trying to hang Waylon, because obviously if Waylon never got caught, he would have never headed into the vocational blocks, and that's where Eddie was mutilating all his patients, but then Eddie would probably end up being shot dead. Or killed by another patient. And the asylum would probably end up burning down, or I don't know if it would burn down, because we would assume that the pyromaniac would still set the mail ward on fire, but then the asylum, I don't think the asylum burnt down when Father Martin burned himself in the chapel, so maybe probably the second unit would probably still put out that fire before shooting the pyromaniac dead. And then Miles would drive Waylon back to his home, and Waylon would reunite with his family, and then Waylon's wife Lisa would also thank Miles for saving her husband alongside Waylon's two kids, and then they would upload their little footage to the public, like we see in the final scene of Whistleblower, as well as all the documents that Waylon grabbed. And Waylon probably still burned his house down, like we saw in the comments, before going into hiding with his kids and wife. But since Billy Hope is alive, he would use the Walrider and release it onto the world, like Father Martin had planned, and he'd begin driving the world slowly insane, use it to take out the rest of Murkoff, and even if the police headed to the asylum to arrest the survivors of the slaughter, they'd probably get killed by the Walrider too. And we don't know if Chris Walker would end up getting killed by the Walrider, even if he left the asylum and headed to the nearest town from there, but then he'd still probably end up being shot to death. Or even if he was arrested, he'd still manage to escape custody somehow. Well, because he managed to break free from the asylum, so I could totally see Chris escaping custody if he did get arrested by the police. But if Waylon had left the asylum before Miles arrived, then the cops would probably find Miles too. But if that were the case, if they found Miles, I'm not sure if they would arrest him for breaking and entering or let him go, since he had no involvement with Murkoff. And this also means the Walrider would kill everyone in Temple Gate, and that pretty much erases Outlast 2 from the timeline completely. So, because obviously Blake Langerman would have never seen the report of the pregnant woman, and then he and his wife Lynn would not fly out the Temple Gate like they do in the game, and they'd end up being slowly driven to insanity like the Walrider, like the Walrider would do that to them. But yeah, that's basically what if Waylon was never caught sending the email. I know it's kind of tricky doing what if scenario on a game like this, when even if you made like older videos where you would just make something up for like character movements who weren't really shown throughout the game. But either ways, you could probably let me know in the comments where you disagree with me on. Do you think Miles and Waylon would team up with each other, or would they just end up going their separate ways? But yeah, I'm not sure what else I do for Outlast. What if I can think of any, but I do have an Uncharted one coming up. That should come out hopefully sometime in the near future, so yeah. Stay tuned for that, and I know that's basically it for, that's pretty much it for this video, because a lot of the movement is speculation, so I said earlier, but yeah. So please like, comment, share, sub, and peace.